Introduction to Prophets and Kings. Last week, we looked at the reign of King Solomon, when Israel reached its high point as a nation. Solomon asked God for the wisdom to rule, and he received it. He reigned for 40 years marked by peace and prosperity. He was given supernatural wisdom to judge and rule his people. He built the temple, built an empire, and began writing the Bible's wisdom literature. Not a bad resume. But to please his many wives, he began worshiping their idols. He had shrines and temples built to them in Israel. Lest that fail to turn your stomachs, consider this. He had an altar for child sacrifices to the Ammonite god Molech built on top of the Mount of Olives, where Jesus ascended into heaven, just across from the temple, facing each other. Yeesh. While the Bible gives us reason to think he personally repented, Solomon's idolatry had disastrous consequences for the nation, which we're going to see this week. Immediately after Solomon's death, his empire crumbles. The people revolt, the kingdom splits in two, and the people start worshiping idols instead of God on a grand scale. Where is God in all this? Calling his people back. How does he call his people back? He sends the prophets. What does this catastrophic time in Israel's history say to us? We all have idols that we need to reject. Our idols are a little less visible. We don't actually make golden statues of the things we're addicted to, and yet they're every bit as real. God is calling us to put him first. He's calling each and every one of us to greater faithfulness. He even invites us to intimacy with him so that he can guide us and we can be a prophetic voice in our world. Let's talk for a couple of minutes about the book of 1st and 2nd Kings. Who wrote it, when, and why? A little bit of historical background. The author is anonymous, but he cares deeply about calling people back to God. He identifies with the prophets, takes their side. The author was an excellent historian. He uses older source documents and he constantly names them in the text. Now, the rest of the deeds of such and such king, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Acts of the Kings of Judah or of Israel, or the Acts of Solomon, or the writings of the prophet Iddo, etc., etc.? It looks as though pages and pages of these older writings were lifted, unchanged, and just put down in 1st and 2nd Kings side by side, with little bridging statements between them. So the source material seems to date back to the time of these kings. The book itself appeared in its final form around the year 560 BC, during the Babylonian exile, right after the events it describes. The author's message is, worshiping God and doing things his way is the best way to live. Worshiping idols and doing things your own way leads to utter disaster. The author gives every king in the book a thumbs up or a thumbs down based on whether they worshipped God or worshipped idols. Solomon's the oddball case. He kind of gets a... Take a look at your handout of the kings. These are all the kings after Solomon. Just to orient yourself, take a look at the first name on the left. That's Rehoboam, Solomon's firstborn son. That column on the left with 20 names shows all the kings of Judah. That's the southern kingdom. They're all descendants of David. Their capital is Jerusalem. They're ruling from Jerusalem. One minor exception worth noting, look at number 7. She's a temporary regent, Queen Athaliah. She's the daughter of evil King Ahab and Queen Jezebel, who we get to next week. She rules while her son Joash is still a boy. But the dynasty, the house of David, remains unbroken. Now look at the row of kings on the right side of the page, starting with Jeroboam I. They are the kings of Israel. That is the northern kingdom, not all of Israel. Their capital city is Samaria. They are not descendants of David. You'll notice every king gets a thumbs up or thumbs down. Green is thumbs up, red is thumbs down, reflecting on what the author had to say about them. So what do you notice about the thumbs? Not too many green, a lot more down than up, exactly.
None in Israel.
Yeah, and none in Israel. It's stated a bit poetically. You know, a bit later on when we get to
one for David.
When we get to Rehoboam here,
David,
the prophet Ahijah is going to say that, you know, Jeroboam, take 10 tribes, and I'll just leave one for the son of David. Well, the one is Judah, but it also includes Simeon, which it kind of absorbed into itself. It also includes Benjamin, which is right on the border, and it also, in the end, includes the Levites, who defect from the north en masse after those golden calves are built. So that one tribe, you got a fair population there still. Ephraim and Manasseh, the house of Joseph, is 2 tribes. The tribes, the 12 tribes was never a very firm and solid number. You want the history on that?
I was thinking math.
Yeah, this is kind of like the 12 apostles, you know. But what about Paul? There's a little more than 12 tribes of Israel. Let's see. Looking at the green thumbs on the kings of Judah, there's 8 good kings, but really, among those, only 2 of them receive the highest praise as following God in an unqualified way. And that's number 13, Hezekiah, and number 16, Josiah. Those are the only 2 that the author of 1 Kings has nothing bad to say about them. They were heroically following God. And we'll get to them in weeks 5 and 6. And I mentioned already that the kings of Judah are 1 dynasty, while the kings of Israel, 19 kings, 9 dynasties. Highly unstable. What that means is that the kings are always overthrowing each other and killing each other off. Whereas the line of David, it's almost like God is supernaturally protecting it. Look here at the bottom of the Israel list. In 722 BC, Samaria falls and Israel is taken captive to Assyria. For the most part, the people of Israel that are taken captive to Assyria never come back. And the whole area is repopulated and later becomes the Samaritans. So they really do lose their Jewish identity in this part of the world. They fall that hard. Hence why God sends the prophets in this time period to call everyone back, because there really is that danger of a permanent fall away from God. It really does happen in the north. And finally, you probably noticed this already, but in the middle, you've got kind of a rough idea of where the prophets fit in. That's the whole rest of the story of the 6-week class, I'm afraid, and there's so much more of it that we're not touching. I mean, we're just looking at 4 of the major prophets. Elijah, Elisha, Isaiah, Jeremiah. There's so many more prophets that speak exactly to that situation. And I think it's fair to say the whole middle chunk of the Old Testament talks about that struggle to remain faithful in this very, very difficult time period. They mention the queen mothers of every king. They're all outsiders. All the kings marry from the surrounding nations, which means all the kings are being raised by their pagan mothers. It just keeps coming and coming and coming back in again. Plus, it's actually forbidden in the law of Moses, but none of the kings ever seem to pay attention to that part.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah, absolutely. It's forbidden in the law of Moses to take foreign wives, to take numerous wives. I mean, they list it out very specifically. All right, let's take a look at the map. In the south, you have Judah. It's pink. And for some reason, it includes Edom, which is just conquered by Judah for a little bit of this history. They're being kind of ambitious here. In the same vein, in the north here, in the yellow, you have Israel, which includes Moab. Again, I think that's kind of ambitious. They only actually rule Moab for part of this time period. I'm going to point out a few really important cities to get an idea of where they are. Look right at that dividing line between Judah and Israel. Just to the south of it, you've got Jerusalem with the star. I highly recommend you put a big circle or a box or something around Jerusalem so you can find it when you need it. Then go straight north about 2 inches. There's Samaria, right under the R in Israel. That's the main capital of the northern kingdom. Put a box around that one too. Just to the right of Samaria, you've got Tirzah and Shechem. They were temporary capitals of the northern kingdom. We get them in this class. And then you'll want to know the 2 places where Jeroboam set up the golden calves. Look down at the very bottom of Israel, the yellow Israel, and you have Bethel. That's golden calf number 1. Then way in the north, at the very top of Israel, the yellow country, is Dan. That's the other golden calf. So, we pick it up in the middle of 1 Kings chapter 11, where Solomon becomes spiritually bankrupt. God raises up adversaries against him to try to bring him back to his senses. There's Hadad the Edomite in the south, Rezon, king of Syria, in the north, and most of all, there's Jeroboam. Jeroboam is an Israelite. He's from the tribe of Ephraim in the north. It's worth knowing that Judah was the main tribe of the south. Ephraim was the main tribe of the north. If you're reading the prophets, they'll use the words Ephraim and Israel interchangeably. Oh, Ephraim, why do you reject me? I am the Lord your God, and so on and so forth. Worth remembering that. Jeroboam from the tribe of Ephraim is very competent and hardworking. So Solomon puts him in charge of all the forced labor of the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh. I read that and raise an eyebrow. Solomon's putting the Israelites themselves to forced labor? Really? One day, Jeroboam is walking along the road when he meets the prophet Ahijah from Shiloh in the north. Ahijah tears his robe, tears it to 12 pieces, and says, "Take for yourself 10 pieces. Thus says the Lord, behold, I am about to tear the kingdom away from Solomon, for he has forsaken me. I will give you 10 tribes, but his son will have 1 tribe, for the sake of my servant David and for the city of Jerusalem which I have chosen. You shall be king over Israel. And if you will listen to all that I command you and walk in my ways and do what is right in my eyes by keeping my commandments, as David my servant did, I will be with you, and I will build you a sure house as I built for David, and I will give Israel to you. I will afflict the descendants of David, but not forever." What's going on here? This sounds quite a bit like the promise God made to David all the way back in 2 Samuel 7, way back when. God makes Jeroboam a promise. The first part is unconditional. I will make you king of Israel. No matter what you do, I'm making you king of Israel. This is the plan. And then there's the conditional promise. If you follow me, I will make you a great dynasty. It's not the unconditional promise God gave to David. No matter what, your house will rule forever. That's not here, but rather he is promising Jeroboam, follow me, and you and your sons will be great. Jeroboam is thrilled with this. He wants to be king. Solomon, incidentally, had already heard from God that because of his idolatry, his kingdom would fall apart after his death, and his son would rule only 1 tribe. Nevertheless, Solomon still tries to kill Jeroboam, and Jeroboam escapes to Egypt. I would really like to know how those events played out. Just how bad did Solomon get? Did he really turn into a Saul-like character and start hunting down poor Jeroboam based on a prophecy that he would be the next king, just like Saul hunted for David? It's possible. It's also possible that ambitious Jeroboam made an early play for the throne, Adonijah style, and ended up having to run for his life. Chapter 11, verse 26 hints at this, saying that Jeroboam lifted up his hand against the king. Bible commentaries are split on this point. They're divided between the good Solomon and the bad Solomon. Which one is it? I shouldn't weigh in because I'm totally biased. Solomon dies, and his firstborn son Rehoboam becomes the next king of Israel. Solomon the wise gives way to Rehoboam the foolish. Whatever possessed Solomon to pick Rehoboam as the next king is one of those questions I want answered when I get to heaven. I assume he opted to go with the firstborn no matter what, in an attempt to avoid civil war after his death. It didn't work. As soon as Jeroboam hears the news that Solomon is dead, he leaves Egypt and confronts Rehoboam. Rehoboam had just arrived in Shechem in the north to be anointed king by all the people. Instead, Jeroboam and all the people get in his face and say, "Your father made our yoke heavy. Lighten the hard service of your father, and we will serve you." Do you remember all the way back in 1 Samuel, for those of you that were in the David class, when the people came to the prophet Samuel and said, "We want a king"? Remember what Samuel said? Yeah, I got it all written out right here, but I'll read the short version. "You don't want a king. A king will take your sons and appoint them to run before his chariots and command his soldiers, to plow his ground and reap his harvest and make his weapons of war. He will take your daughters as cooks and perfumers and bakers. He will take 1/10 of your grain and wine and give it to his army. He will take your male and female slaves, your best cattle and donkeys. He will take 1/10 of your flocks, and you will be his slaves. And in that day, you will cry out because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves. But the Lord will not answer you in that day." That day has now come. It's what, about 100 years later? The people decide they have had enough of kings, enough of empire, enough tyranny and oppression, enough taxes and forced labor. They are ready to rebel, and God lets the tragedy play out. Rehoboam consults the elders, Solomon's old advisors, and says, "What should I do?" They reply, "Be a good servant to the people, and they will serve you forever." Then Rehoboam asks the young men, his drinking buddies, "What should I do?" And they reply, paraphrase, "Show the people who's boss." More specifically, they say, "Tell the people, my little finger is thicker than my father's loins. My father made your yoke heavy, but I will add to your yoke. My father chastised you with whips, but I will chastise you with scorpions." A scorpion, by the way, you know, we're used to think of it as the little creature that climbs in our shoes. It's actually a whip with spikes on it. So, which speech does Rehoboam deliver to the people? The one where he promises to serve them faithfully all the days of his life? Or the one where he compares the size of his loins to his father's? Yeah, a wise man once said, "A soft answer turns away wrath." When I was looking up that verse, I saw that just below it was written, "But a fool despises his father's instruction." That made me laugh. After Rehoboam delivers his answer, the people reply, "What portion have we in David?" It's the old rebel cry of the North. It's their declaration of independence. Rehoboam goes back to Judah and sends the man, the one in charge of forced labor. He wants to try and threaten them some more. That'll make them come to their senses. What is he thinking? The northern tribes stone the overseer of forced labor to death, and they make Jeroboam their king. Rehoboam raises an army to try and force the north to submit to him. But the prophet Shemaiah comes to him and says, "Thus saith the Lord, you shall not go up and fight against your kinsmen. Return every man to his home, for this thing is from me, God." Rehoboam and the people listen and go home. That doesn't stop there from being near constant warfare between Israel and Judah from this point forward. What are some lessons for us in the division of the kingdom? Lesson number 1, soft answer does turn away wrath. Kind words diffuse hostility. God calls us to be peacemakers. Rehoboam didn't get that at all. Lesson number 2, servant leadership. The elders called Rehoboam to serve the people, but he ignored them. Jesus led by serving the people, by healing, by speaking words they needed to hear, by washing their feet. We're always called to lead by serving, and never by lording it over others. Rehoboam didn't get that either. Lesson number 3, division is tragic, especially within the church. The prophet Ahijah tore his robe into 12 pieces to show Jeroboam that the kingdom was about to be torn apart. Jesus went to his death in a seamless robe that could not be torn apart, to show that his is a kingdom that cannot be divided. Did you ever think there would be a connection between Ahijah and Jesus? Ultimately, in heaven, we're not going to be divided. Not us Catholics, in different parishes, or Catholics and Pentecostals, or whoever else God chooses to bring up to heaven. That means we need to work on loving each other right now, because God willing, we're all going to be rubbing elbows in heaven. We better practice here on earth. The church sticks together.